that emotion, it all comes erupting out, and before you know it, it's going on, and you can't stop it, and you don't know what to do. So I wonder if you have ever had a situation where you've allowed your emotions to get the better of you. Well, if you haven't been around here very long, and maybe you join us online, there is a very famous story in relation to me in this, and it involves a piece of device called a whippersnapper. Now, those of you that have a whippersnapper know exactly what I'm talking about with this. Now, my dad was very, very gifted. I mean, he would get frustrated with things, but he also had a talent to work on it and work on it and work on it. If that failed, then he would lose it, completely lose it, throw the thing, everything was just excitement plus. So now, here's the problem. I have the frustration, I have no talent in between. So it's got to leap straight to explosion. So anyway, this day, I picked up this whippersnapper that my dad had found at the dump and repaired and given to me. And I started, it's like, I'm trying to start this thing, and it would start up, and then it'd go, bleh. So I started again, you know, it's like, and this happens three times, and then I just lost it. I threw this thing across the yard. It went about 6 meters, it landed there. I started yelling as I was going towards it, said, "You will never make me sin again." And I got a shovel, and I'm whacking this thing with a shovel, and there's bits of whippersnapper flying off everywhere. It was awesome. And then I got the wheelie bin, and I stuck it in. The lid wouldn't go down because it was poking up. So I ripped it out, got a hacksaw, ripped it in half, put it in, slammed the lid. I said, "You will never cause me to sin again." Unfortunately, my neighbour had been standing on the fence and witnessing this whole thing, and he just yells out, "Praising the Lord today, are we, Pastor?" To which I went, "Come here, Mark." Now, not one of my finer moments. Now, of course, when my dad heard about this, that I destroyed it and put it in the bin, he snuck up during the night and took it back home and fixed it. And he still had the thing till his passing. It's like, I don't get it. But if you want to know what that looks like, what does that event look like in real life? Well, there's a very funny little video of a guy called Basil Fawlty, and his car won't start. His car won't start. So have a bit of a look at this, because he just loses it with his car. And you can imagine, this is kind of me with the whippersnapper. Take a look at this.
That's it! You've tried on this once too often! Right! Well, don't say I haven't warned you! I've laid it on the line to you time and time again! Right! Well, this is it! I'm going to give you a damn good thrashing!
That's kind of like my whippersnapper incident. Not something I'm proud of, but it's gone down in the annals of history, so it's great. What about you? Anything that you've ever done that you've kind of just lost it? Ever had something just trigger you at work? Someone says something or does something, or maybe your spouse does something, or a friend does something, and before you know it, there's this eruption going on inside, and there's things coming out of your mouth, and you know you should stop, and you know you're going to have to apologize, but you just can't stop, and it just flies out. And then you go, I feel so much better. Right, now go and apologize. Well, this is what this series is all about. You're not the boss of me. How do you say no to emotions that are competing for our control? Now, it's been 50-50 all week whether I'm going to do this section, because certain parts of our community feel like I shouldn't do it, shouldn't go there. And then there are other parts of the community that go, I think you should go there. And you know what I'm going to do, don't you?
Go there.
I'm going to go there. So anyway, because I think this is a humor, it's satire comedy out of the 1970s, and it's out of a movie called Life of Brian. I'm not going to play it, but I'm going to talk it through with you. And I'm just going to let you see a slide, because this is about emotions, and it's about the fact that nobody likes being told what to do. Now, if you've ever seen this film, you'll realize that this group of people represent a rebellion against Rome. They are against the oppressors. This is the People's Front of Judea, not to be confused with the Popular People's Front. It's the People's Front of Judea, and they're having a meeting. And they're having this meeting to have a discussion about what to do to really stick it to the Romans and take the country back. So they're having a conversation. The guy over here, he just says, well, it's the right of every man, to which Stan says, oh, and woman. Oh, yes, and woman. And he goes, and all you brothers. And of course, Stan goes, and sister. And the other one goes, what do you keep talking about women for, Stan? What do you keep talking about women? And he goes, well, I want to be a woman. And he goes, you want a what? I want to be a woman. And she goes, why do you want to be a woman, Stan? He goes, I want to have babies. To which this guy goes, you want a what? You want to have babies? You can't have babies. To which he goes, don't you oppress me. Don't you oppress me. And he goes, I'm not oppressing you, Stan. You haven't got a womb. Where's the fetus going to just stay? You're going to keep it in a box? You can't have babies. Don't you oppress me. Now, it's so uncomfortable here in this moment. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this. The guy over here just goes, well, let's just think about this. Okay, so we'll all agree that you don't have a womb, so you can't have babies. It's just nobody's fault, not even the Romans, right? So it's nobody's fault, not even the Romans. But what we will do is, this is symbolic of our fight against the oppressor. We will fight for your right to have babies. And he goes, what? We will fight, it's symbolic. We'll fight for your right to have babies. What is the point of fighting for his right to have babies if he can't have babies? And they go, well, it's symbolic of our fight against the oppressors. And he says it's symbolic of his fight against reality. Now, that is the funny thing of a satire comedy in the 70s. But you can see the emotion, and you can see what happens when things are coming out. Now, this is a real conversation today, all the time. The same thing, but don't you tell me what to do. It's the same thing. And it comes out of us because within us all is this need for autonomy. We think the Australian dream is just to get autonomy. They just want to have autonomy. I want to be able to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with who I want to do it, and I want to have enough money in the bank just in case I get caught and need to buy my way out. We think that autonomy is the answer. We are convinced that once I can call all my own shots, I will call the right shots. Once I can call all my own shots, I will call the right shots. We're convinced this is a control issue, and if I'm in control, I won't make the mistakes. I'll decide everything that's good. But there's a problem which Jeremiah pointed out years and years and years earlier to Israel when they were continually getting in trouble. And he pointed out this simple thing. He said, the heart is deceitful above all things, and it is desperately, is this thing playing up? It's desperately wicked. Who can know it? He's saying it's desperate. He said your heart is deceitful above all things. Your heart will deceive you. Have you noticed that? It deceives you by emotions. Aren't we baffled by stories that people have who have a lot of autonomy? They've got lots of money, they got lots of fame, they got lots of stuff. It's like they can do whatever they want, however they want, and they've got everything going, and then they just go and do something, and you say to yourself, he did what? She did what? How could they possibly make that kind of mistake? Autonomy, your heart will deceive you. Now, some of you, I don't want you to put this slide up just yet, so hold it there. Some of you will realize that there is a very famous actor, don't put it up, very famous actor, and he's been in so many films. He's mega rich. He's got He's got the choice of any kind of woman that he wants. He's got money. He's got everything. He's got total autonomy. He works with the most beautiful women in the world. And you think, man, this guy has got it all. And his name is Hugh Grant. And here's a photo of him being busted in LA, soliciting on the streets of LA. And you think to yourself, what? This guy's got everything and shows everyone, and he's what is going on? You see, the heart is wicked. It deceives us. We think we can control it. Really, our need for supervision may someday come to an end if we can silence the toxic voices that are within us. That's what we think. But the real thing is, our need of supervision will never come to an end until we silence those toxic voices that come from within. You've got to figure out how to silence those voices. Our problem is not that we won't take advice. Our problem is we take bad advice. We take our own advice. And it's bad advice because it's coming through the filter of emotions that are distorting truth, and they're not helping us. And so you've got to learn, and I've got to learn, and that's what this series is about, how to say, you're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me. You've got to learn to say no to those emotions that are competing for control. Now, most of us have a primary emotion that we default to. I don't know what yours is, but you probably know after the whippersnapper what mine is. My default is if something doesn't work, I just get angry, and it just doesn't go like this. It goes. That's my default. You know, as I was preparing for this, do you know what my family did to help me with this? Chris has got a bad shoulder. They bought a flat pack to put together. With a stupid little thing like this. I'm happy to say I passed the test, although I did see a few of them hanging around with the video just in case they were going to get another incident, but I managed to get through it. See, we have a primary emotion. Some of us, it's fear. If something happens you don't like, you'll withdraw in fear. Other of us, it's anger. Some of us will withdraw and become very depressed. But you have that initial one that's in there. And what happens is that you've learned to control your primary emotion. Because you can't let it all hang out there all the time. So you've got to put it out there. So if you want to stay out of trouble, you've got to learn how to monitor that emotion. So if you want to get the job, you're going to have to display better in the interview. You can't just come out there and hit the whippersnapper. You're going to have to display it so people, and you learn how to manage the emotions. We do it to get jobs. We do it to get dates. You get one date and then you go on the second date. I said to Anita when she was thinking about dating someone, I said, date for at least 6 months. Because they can't hold it together. That primary emotion will come out. And sure enough, after about 4 months, it's like, whoa, okay, yeah, good knowing you. See you in heaven. So you got to understand it's this. But what we do is we sort of like monitor our emotions. And monitoring the behavior isn't enough. That's why I'm going to suggest to you, even if you don't know Christ, you should start following Jesus. You seriously should consider, even if you don't believe everything that he says at the moment, you should consider following him, because he talks to his disciples that we're going to walk through, and he helps them understand monitoring emotion is not enough. And monitoring your behavior is not enough. You've got to take it a step further. And when it comes to, if you are considering a relationship with Jesus, I always say, anybody that predicts their own death, burial, and resurrection and pulls it off, I'm pretty much going off whatever they say, because there's no one else that's done that. So it's worth consideration. So, and if what Jesus says is true, then we're going to have some work to do when it comes to this area. I have toxic voices that still try to erupt at times, tried to come out yesterday in the flat pack, but I managed to sort it out. You'll have them. You've got to learn to not allow them to be the boss. So we're going to discover how easy it is to identify something else that's going on beyond your emotions. We're going to take a kind of a bit of a dive down. This is where I'm going to unpack that scripture that Anita just read before. Just give you a little bit of context and understanding. Whether they're hanging out together and Jesus is talking to the guys and making a few comments and that, and inevitably a crowd starts to gather around, and Matthew thought this, whatever Jesus was saying was really good enough. I think I should write this down. So he wrote it down and documented it for us. But it starts with then some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law came from Jerusalem and asked something. Now, they didn't come from Jerusalem because they wanted to explore and understand more of Jesus. They came to Jerusalem to see Jesus because they despised him. He was gaining popularity. He was doing stuff they couldn't do. They were coming there with the motivation of, how do we trip this guy up? So then they go along and they say, why do your disciples, Jesus, why did they not wash their hands? What do your disciples break the tradition of what? Us elders. Why do you break the tradition of us elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat. Now, water was scarce in these days. I mean, no one's running around looking to put solar panels on or go install a ream. There's not much water around. But the elders had this thing called tradition, and it was called an oral tradition. This is very convenient. So you had the written Torah, which was the written words that Moses brought down, and everyone knew what to do with that. But apparently, Moses had an oral Torah as well, that he only told certain leaders, and it was only certain people, a very small amount, that need to know it, and it was never to be written down. How convenient is that? So it's never written down, so no one actually knows what it is, but they pull it out whenever something's going that they don't like, and they throw this oral Torah out. So anyway, they've thrown this thing out to Jesus, and he's not buying into it. He's just not buying into this oral Torah nonsense, because he knows that they use the oral Torah as a way of getting around what they should be doing that Moses told them to do. That's what it's all about. And they keep it secret so they can control everybody in the process. So they're trying to trip him up on this whole ceremonial washing from part of that oral Torah. Now Jesus replies to them, why do you break the command of God for the sake of your own tradition? Now they know they're in trouble. They know, oh man, he's gone to the written stuff now. We're in big trouble. So they're kind of sweating a little bit now. I said, yeah, he's telling them, he said, you have a fine way of putting aside what you should do in order to actually justify your own traditions. And so he's getting stuck into me. He said, I'm not buying this nonsense. And he says to them, you nullify the word of God. You nullify it for the sake of your own tradition. Now, I cannot tell you how many people that I know do this every day of the week. They know what God says, but they have their own idea of what God says, which is more convenient to do, and so we will lean into that. So it's not like this is not happening anymore for us in our world. It's still transpiring. So then Jesus gets stuck into me. He says, you hypocrites, and he brings out Isaiah. So he's brought out the bin guns. These guys know you brought out Isaiah. There's nowhere to go now. They're in all sorts of trouble. But he's using this to try and help them transition and get some profound insight about what is going on really here, what's going on in them. So he says, these people honor me with their lips. He's saying, yeah, you talk a good game, but you don't play a good game. He said, you've got other agendas that are going. I said, the honor with, but he said, you know what, this whole oral tradition thing you got going on here, that's really about you wanting to control. That's about the religious elite maintaining control. And he says, but their hearts are far from me. He said, their hearts are far from me. He's calling them out. He's calling them out and saying, mate, I'm not playing this religious game with you. I'm not playing this game. I know this emotional game that you're playing, and I'm not buying into it. Now, the more this conversation goes on, the bigger the crowd gets. And the crowds turn up because they know something. Whenever Jesus starts talking like this to the Pharisees, there's going to come a moment when he's going to drop a bombshell. So they're all around there and they're watching. And then he goes on, he goes, well, what goes into someone's mouth by accident doesn't defile them. Makes no difference. He said, I'm not going to buy into this. You're making through this oral tradition God petty. Like as if, well, if you don't do this, well, I'll get 10 minutes in the sin bin for a dietary restriction and things. Like they're making very petty, and he's just not buying into it. But then what he says next was like, oh, it's mic drop moment. He says, but what comes out of their mouth is what defiles them. And then he just kind of like drops the mic and walks away. It's like, boom. What comes out of their mouth? And they're going, well, he's just walking away. And the the disciples are coming behind and they're looking back going, and then one says to the other, I think we won. Did you? I think we won. I don't know. Do you know what is he talking about? I don't know what he's talking about, but I feel like we won. What do you think, Pete? I think we won. It felt like we won. What about you, Thomas? Oh, I doubt it. No. They thought they'd won. So they just walked off. They got no idea what's going on. They have no idea. So then they come and they ask him. They say, do you know? Well, think about this. Think about this. Do you know? Do you know? Who's going to approach someone whose father is omnipotent, all-powerful, is omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipresent everywhere at once? Do you know? Well, of course he knows. It's a dumb question to start with, but then they said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this? It's like, yeah, duh. Yeah. But he doesn't even address it. Doesn't even address it. He just says, leave them. Leave them. They are blind guides. And if the blind leads the blind, they both fall into a pit. He's trying to say, guys, that religious system, that old system is devoid of life. It doesn't work. And so Peter's a little bit nervous about this because it feels like he's like speaking against their dietary laws. He wasn't about that. He was just trying to make a point about what's going on, how emotions are driving them, and how it's become very, very unhealthy. So then Peter just says to Jesus, well, Jesus, could you explain to us this parable? And I like this from here on because it gets you kind of catch a little bit of humor because Jesus goes, are you still so dull? Are you still so dull? Peter, are you so thick? Do you not understand what I'm talking about here? Do you not understand what's going on here? This is not about what you think it's about. There's other things going on. And he enables them to catch a glimpse of what's really important to the Father, what's important to him, and what's important to God. And what should be important to us. And he kind of says this statement in a roundabout way without saying is, God is not concerned with how our behaviour affects him. Did you know that? He's not concerned about how your behaviour affects him. How your behaviour and my behaviour doesn't affect him at all. He lives way beyond it. How you behave affects you. There's this thing called sowing and reaping, and it's awful. I wish it wasn't there. But as you sow, so you reap. But it doesn't affect him. He's beyond the realm of that. Your behaviour affects you. And just what Jesus was trying to get them to understand, he couldn't be clearer. The law wasn't given to make God happy. It was given to be a benefit to you. But you find a way of getting around it with your own oral traditions. So he's just saying, man, are you still so dull? Don't you see what enters in your mouth goes into your stomach and then comes out? And I'm sure one of the boys said, well, we're not that dull. We experience that a couple of times a day. Especially if you have a bad prawn or something like that, you know. So he's being playful with them, but he's being playful to get the point across. He said it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles, it's what comes out of your mouth. That is what defiles a person. Now, when it talks about being defiled, that carries religious implications because to be defiled puts you at odds with God. And he's trying to say, what you eat doesn't put you at odds with God. What comes out of your mouth can put you at odds with God. Because the things that come out of your mouth come out of your heart. They originate from within. That's why it's not enough to monitor behavior. You've got to get beyond that and we're going to monitor heart. What is going on? Now, here's a little list of the things that comes out of your heart. These are the things that defile you. Before I share it, you know what? Sometimes people will react to that statement. You know, like, well, I don't mean everything that I say. And I think Jesus would push back a little bit on that because he said, you know, out of your heart, your mouth speaks. I think he'd push a little bit back on and say, sometimes I say things I don't mean. I think he'd push back and say, well, sometimes you say things you don't mean to say out loud. Sometimes you say things you don't mean to say out loud, but they come out, they erupt out. In a moment of that emotion, it all comes erupting out. And before you know it, it's going on. And you can't stop it and you don't know what to do. And you can see your whole life just falling. And it's like, I'm in free fall and I don't know what to do. And you know you're going to be apologizing for the next 5 years, but you just can't stop because it's erupting up. For out of your heart comes these evil thoughts, which is why Jeremiah says the heart, it's wicked, it's deceitful. It will deceive you. If your heart is not fully surrendered to Christ, it will come out and the emotions will distort it. So here's some of the things that come out of your heart. Murder, adultery, immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. Slander's a good one. Have you ever told a story to someone about someone that ended up that someone thinking the less of the other someone? That's a lot of someones in there. You know what I mean? Ever told a story just spinning it enough so that that person sees that person in a slightly more negative light and maybe makes you a little bit more positive? That's slander. Character assassination. Where does that start? It starts from the heart, the insecurity of the heart. So greed, Mark says there's greed, there's malice, there's deceit, there's envy, there's arrogance. It just goes on and on. And these are the things that defile. These are the things, that moments that embarrass us. That we look at and go, I can't believe I did that. How could I say that? Why did I do that? They kill relationships. It kills businesses. It kills school friendships and things like that because it continually comes up out of the heart. That's what defiles the person. Not eating stuff that's not washed. That doesn't make any difference at all. That just goes in, pass through, no big deal. But it's what that's coming out that is the problem. Now, some traditions aren't bad. Now, I know some of you like to do your devotions over night time before you go to bed. That's okay. Some like to do it in the morning. Some like to pray laying down. Some like to pray kneeling. One girl told me she likes to pray while driving and putting a lipstick on. I have no idea how that works, but whatever works. So we all have kind of traditions, and they're not bad. As long as you're not thinking that those traditions somehow make God happy with you. Well, he's going to be much more happy with me today because I did 3 devotions, 3 soaps this week, so I feel like I'm going to have a good week. Or I went to 2 family gatherings. Oh, but I missed one last week. Oh, I'm going to have a bad week. I just know it. If you're thinking like that, you're in trouble. You're putting a tradition. That's the tradition. That's that oral tradition that's trying to put on people expectations. I want to say right now, if you're anywhere and there's someone that's saying to you, you have to do this or you have to do that and all that before God to love you, or you better do this or you better do that, and they start bellowing out, you got to do this, you should run. Go find another church, go find another community, because that's not what it's all about. God is most interested, and one of the key things coming out of this is that it's not what so much you're doing, but it's what's going on in your heart that's ready to erupt, that comes out of you, that can defile. And the key thing he's trying to get them into here, trying to stand through this process, is if you mistreat someone that God loves, man, that's a whole other thing. That draws the wrong kind of intention. So what I'm hoping we'll do is we'll just monitor what's going on, the real source, what's going on in the heart, not just the behavior. You can monitor your behavior and control it at times, but you can't control it forever. You've got to figure out what's going on in the heart. So we want to personalize it, and we want to give it some names to some of these things and call out some of the things so that God can renew our hearts. And that's why I said you should consider following Jesus, because he's the only one that can renew a heart. And your heart has to be renewed in order for your emotions to not deceive you and boss you around. They're like horrible bosses, like real mean. Have you ever had a mean boss? No, none of you staff in here say anything, okay. Was that Wendy? I'm sure that was Wendy. You ever had a real mean, nasty boss, bossing you around, telling you what to do, micromanaging you everywhere? I know I have staff. I'm not sure where they are, but but you know what I mean? If you've got someone like that, it doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make you feel good because you're being bossed around. But you're being bossed around by inferior bosses, and that's what your emotions do. They boss you around, and they cause you to do things that you don't want to do, which you end up paying a price for later in relationships. So here's what you should say. Say that loud with me. You're not the boss of me. Say it again. You're not the boss of me. All you guys in Eleanor, you need to say this. You're not the boss of me. So anger, you got to name it. What's your primary anger? You're not the boss of me. Tried to be the boss of me yesterday with that flat pack. I'm telling you, I was so close to grabbing his hand and going for a walk. But no, you got to figure out. Envy, you're not the boss of me. Insecurity, you're not the boss of me. Whatever it is, you need to call it out for what it is. Acknowledge it for what it is and say, you are not the boss of me. I mean, how different would your life be and my life be if we could just learn to monitor our hearts and know what is going on? Think about your relationship. How different would your relationship have been growing up if maybe your dad wouldn't have allowed anger and guilt to be the boss of him? Or if mum wouldn't have allowed envy or jealousy or insecurity to be the boss? And those of you that have kids, you should ask them on a regular basis, what's going on in your heart? Has anybody done something to damage your heart? Because that will cause a problem. So and if you're a follower of Christ, we've already got a boss. We already have a boss. And he's a good boss. Not those inferior bosses of emotions that keep pushing us around everywhere. And our boss says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. He says, if you're tired of being pushed around by these inferior bosses of your emotions, come to me. Come to me. He says, I can give you something because I want nothing from you. That's what Jesus says to us. He says, I can actually give you something because I don't want anything from you. Everybody in this world does something because they want something. Jesus is not in that place. And he says, I can give you peace. He says, you take that yoke, my yoke on you, take it upon you. I'm gentle, I'm humble. Look at it. It's in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. He says, you don't have to be bossed around by these things. You can actually live from a place of peace. And you can stare these things down when they try and erupt and say, you are not the boss of me. But you have to understand, and you have to monitor your heart. I can remember a dear old saint when I was fairly young in my faith, and we were talking about free will and how emotions play havoc in free will. And he said to me, when you truly realize the depth of free will that God has given you, he said, when you really, because he was trying to tell me, because I was trying to live my life by laws and I was getting really in a mess. He says, when you try and finally realize the breadth and the depth of this free will that God has given to you, he said, the best thing you can do when you realize that is give it straight back to him and say, I really appreciate all that freedom, but you know what? I would really like you to tell me what's best. Because he said that free will is what causes us all of our dramas. So you're not the boss of me. These emotions aren't the boss of you. And we're going to learn to not just monitor our behavior, but get behind and monitor our heart. Now, in a minute, Anita's going to come up and join me because she feels like this series we're going to do a little bit different. Going to drill straight down with a few questions. Do some workshopping here and online. So let me just pray, and then I need to come up. Father, I just thank you that this series has got the potential to totally transform our lives, Lord, because we are so often bossed around by our emotions. We're being led into things, and we say things, and we do things, and it just doesn't help, and it just seems they're continually bossing around, and we just get in a bigger mess. But Lord, if we learn to understand that our heart fully surrendered to you will enable us to take control of those emotions so that we're not being bossed around by them. So, Father, I ask that you would just have your way across this series, and we'd hear great reports of people that are figuring out and being able to stand up on who they are in you and not being dictated to by some false emotion that's trying to wreck their lives. So we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.